I was always the one who held us together, the one who paid when no one else would. But being the family's invisible glue meant I was never seen, never thanked. At 30, I've grown used to slipping into the background, like a shadow stretched across every family gathering, every crisis, every silent moment of struggle. My job as a school counselor demands empathy I hardly have left by the end of the day, yet I carry the weight of my family's needs like a second skin. The last vacation we took, me, my stepmother Julia, my half-siblings Marcus and Elena, and Dad, I fronted over $5,000 for flights, lodging, food, and all the little extras. I remember the biting complaints. Why do we have to stay in this hotel? Skylar, can we save money on food? Julia sat back, arms crossed, a smirk playing on her lips as if daring anyone to question her. I absorbed every insult, every sharp glance, every whispered gripe. Nothing new, just another reminder that my efforts were invisible. I kept the receipts tucked away in a battered binder, each one a testament to my quiet labor, my unacknowledged sacrifices. No one suspects I track every cent and every moment of emotional exhaustion. It's my secret strength, a silent ledger where I document debts that no one else will acknowledge. The tension between us was palpable, electric in its quiet hostility. I wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, they'd see me, not as the family ATM, but as someone worth loving. But deep down, I knew better. Yet I held on to hope, clinging to the fragile thread of acceptance that slipped further from my grasp with every family event. The first time Julia appeared in my life, I was 12, caught in the awkward shift of a new family dynamic. Dad had remarried, and the house filled with new rules and new faces. Marcus, older and entitled, Elena, young and doted upon. I remember that Christmas dinner vividly. The table was laden with food, but my place felt like an afterthought. Julia handed me a cheaply wrapped gift, barely glancing my way, while Elena received a sparkling necklace and effusive praise. I told myself it was just because Julia was new, that one day she'd see me, the real me beneath the quiet exterior. But the pattern was clear. Marcus was my golden boy, showered with expensive toys and favors, while my own achievements, my quiet victories at school and work, were met with barely concealed dismissal. Julia's favoritism wasn't subtle. She celebrated Elena's every success with an intensity that made my own accomplishments feel invisible. I became the responsible one, the caretaker, the one who sacrificed endlessly, convinced that love would follow if I just gave enough. I learned early how to swallow the sting of neglect, to smile through the quiet betrayals. I was the family's invisible backbone, holding everything together while losing pieces of myself in the process. The comparisons stung sharply, but I told myself it was temporary, that my devotion would be rewarded in time. The years passed, but the favoritism only deepened, a slow, burning ache that settled into my bones. By the time I turned 25, I was exhausted, but still giving. I loaned Julia $60,000 for a home renovation, a sum I scraped together by working double shifts and cutting back on my own needs. When Dad required heart surgery, I covered $40,000 in medical expenses, juggling bills while keeping a brave face. I sacrificed graduate school plans, putting my dreams on hold to pay for Marcus's failing business startup, working 2 jobs to keep everything afloat. Carlos, my husband, was my anchor through it all, a calm presence reminding me I deserved better, that my self-worth wasn't measured by how much I gave. He encouraged me to recognize my own value, even when I couldn't see it myself. I had a secret weapon, a ledger filled with every dollar spent, and a journal chronicling every emotional sacrifice, the late-night babysitting for Elena, the endless crisis management, the endless family emergencies that drained my time and energy. Yet the family reacted with entitlement and dismissal. Julia's favorite phrase cut through the noise: Skylar's money, not ours. It stung every time, a reminder that my labor, both financial and emotional, was treated as a resource to be exploited rather than a gift to be cherished. Marcus shrugged it off, and Elena, blissfully unaware, soaked up Julia's favoritism like a sponge. I was the invisible giver, the family's ATM machine, with no recognition or gratitude. The first time Julia humiliated me publicly, it was during a Christmas gathering that should have been warm and joyous. Instead, Julia's voice cut through the room like a knife. "Skylar, you always have to control everything. Maybe if you loosened the purse strings, we'd all be happier." The room froze. Eyes darted uncomfortably, some avoiding mine altogether. My cheeks burned as Marcus smirked and Elena looked down, embarrassed. The words weren't just an insult. They were a public condemnation of everything I'd done to keep the family afloat. I tried to reply, voice trembling. "I'm just trying to keep us afloat." But Julia cut me off with a sharp laugh, dismissing me before I could finish. That moment planted a seed of doubt, a crack in the armor I'd spent years building. Maybe my efforts were never appreciated. Maybe they caused resentment instead. The sting was deep, but I swallowed my tears and anger, forcing a smile and retreating into silence. I told myself it was just one moment, that things would get better, but the humiliation lingered, a quiet wound beneath the surface. I felt exposed, vulnerable, yet I still held on to my dignity, even as I questioned everything I thought I knew about family and love. The moment I dared to speak up, even slightly, Julia pounced. It was as if she had been waiting for this crack in my silence, this faint flicker of defiance, to unleash a storm. Overnight, whispers slithered through the family and even beyond, neighbors and extended relatives quietly passing along Julia's carefully crafted stories. Rumors painted me as greedy, selfish, ungrateful, the exact opposite of the quiet caretaker I'd tried so hard to be. At family gatherings, Marcus and Elena turned sharp, suspicious eyes on me, their questions dripping with accusation. "Why did you pay for that? You're always stepping in where you shouldn't." Elena's voice, usually so sweet, now held a cautious edge, as if she were trying to figure out if I was some kind of threat. Marcus, taking his cue from Julia, became more dismissive, his laughter less warm and more cutting. Julia's gaslighting was relentless. In private, she told me I was the problem, the one tearing the family apart. "You think you're the victim, but you're the one causing the tension," she sneered one evening, her voice low but venomous. I wanted to argue, to show her the truth hidden in my ledger, but her words had a way of sinking deep, making me doubt my own reality. Invitations to family dinners became fewer and farther between. When I did show up, I was met with cold shoulders and hollow smiles. Elena, once a bright-eyed child, now seemed to carry a script Julia had written for her, a script where I was the outsider, the villain. My attempts to hold on to any semblance of connection felt like grasping at smoke. The house that was once a place of family became a battleground where my presence was unwelcome, my motives questioned, and my worth erased. One afternoon, I caught Julia in the kitchen, her eyes sharp as she whispered into her phone, "Skylar's just out for herself. She's never done anything for this family without expecting a reward." The words hung in the stale air like a poison. I wanted to scream, to defend myself, but instead, I clenched my fists and swallowed the lump rising in my throat. The family I had built my life around was crumbling, and it was all because Julia had decided I was the enemy. I realized then how isolated I had become, how the people I once trusted now believed the lies more than my truth. The silence I had once embraced as a shield was now a prison, tightening around me with every whispered accusation and pointed glance. Despite the creeping loneliness, I refused to give up entirely. I knew I had to find a way to break through the fog of manipulation, to reclaim my voice before it was silenced forever. But Julia's tactics were terrifyingly effective, her network of allies tightening like a noose. I was caught between wanting to fight back and fearing that any resistance would only deepen the chasm between me and the family I longed to be part of. The weight of abandonment settled heavily on my shoulders as I realized that standing up was no longer just about proving my worth. It was about survival. With Carlos by my side, I summoned every ounce of courage to call for a family meeting. I wanted to address the tension head-on, to clear the air and make my contributions visible beyond the whispers and accusations. Sitting opposite Julia, Marcus, and Elena in the cramped living room, I laid out my secret weapon, a thick binder filled with receipts, bank statements, and documented moments of emotional labor. Carlos acted as mediator, his calm voice steady as he urged everyone to listen. I spoke quietly but firmly, recounting the thousands I'd poured into family vacations, medical bills, and emergencies. I detailed the nights I'd spent babysitting Elena, the times I'd juggled my own work to cover Marcus's debts. But Julia was a master at twisting reality. She denied the debts, dismissing my evidence as exaggeration and paranoia. "Skylar always sees problems where there aren't any," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. Marcus nodded in agreement, adding, "Maybe you just want attention, Skylar." Elena, caught between loyalty and confusion, looked down, avoiding my gaze. The air thickened with tension as Julia took control of the narrative, painting herself as the victim of my supposed demands. Carlos, desperate to keep peace, suggested we all try a little harder to get along, an empty platitude that ignored the real wounds beneath. I left that meeting hollow, my carefully prepared truth dismissed and twisted into a tale of conflict I had supposedly created. The hope I'd clung to flickered and dimmed, replaced by a growing sense of defeat. I felt smaller than ever, reduced to the role Julia had carved out for me, a troublemaker, the family's black sheep. The silence I once bore quietly now screamed inside me, a painful reminder that peace was a fragile illusion in a house built on manipulation and favoritism. I wondered if I was naive for believing things could change, or if I had simply missed the moment when the family I loved turned irrevocably against me. The next blow came at Elena's 18th birthday party, a night meant to celebrate her coming of age, but instead became a stage for Julia's cruelty. As guests mingled in the decorated backyard, Julia raised her voice for all to hear. "Skylar won't be receiving any inheritance. She's been selfish and divisive for too long." The word struck me like a slap, freezing the air around me. Faces turned, eyes wide with shock. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wildfire. I felt heat rise to my cheeks, hot and humiliating. All those years of sacrifice, the tens of thousands I'd poured into this family's wealth and well-being, were erased with a single cold sentence. Marcus smirked openly, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Maybe now you'll finally learn your place." Laughter bubbled from a few distant relatives, cruel and sharp. The weight of the insult was heavy, not just emotionally, but practically. My future, my security, now dangled on the edge of a knife held by Julia's spite. Elena looked torn, her eyes flickering between me and her mother, caught in the crossfire of loyalty and manipulation. The party's festive atmosphere shattered, replaced by a chilling sense of exclusion and powerlessness. I stood there, fists clenched at my sides, a quiet fury simmering beneath the surface. This wasn't just humiliation, it was an erasure, a declaration that all I had given meant nothing. That night I understood the stakes had grown far beyond unspoken resentment. Julia's control was absolute, her willingness to weaponize family gatherings as battlegrounds clear. The damage went deeper than hurt feelings. It threatened the very foundation of my life and identity. Yet beneath the shame and shock, a stubborn ember of defiance kindled within me. I refused to be invisible, refused to be written out of my own story. But how to fight back when the enemy held every card, every narrative, every whispered lie? In a final, desperate attempt to reach across the widening gulf, I wrote Julia a letter. My hand shook as I put pen to paper, pouring out years of exhaustion, pain, and longing for fairness. I asked for respect, for acknowledgement of everything I'd given, and for boundaries that would preserve my dignity. I spoke of my dreams deferred, my sacrifices unseen, and my hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to heal. I sent the letter with trembling hands, waiting for a sign that Julia might soften, that the family could be salvaged. Her reply was colder than I could have imagined. "You'll never be one of us." Those 5 words cut deeper than any argument or insult before. It was a final, irrevocable rejection, a line drawn in the sand, a door slammed shut. The warmth I'd sought, the acceptance I'd begged for, dissolved into icy dismissal. In that moment, the truth settled over me like a winter frost. Julia's toxicity was entrenched, and no amount of goodwill could bridge the divide she'd created. That rejection, brutal and unyielding, did not break me. Instead, it ignited a fierce resolve I hadn't known I possessed. If Julia would never accept me, then I would find a way to accept myself. If the family refused to see my value, I would reclaim it on my own terms. The line Julia crossed became my boundary, a point beyond which I would no longer suffer in silence. The fight for my dignity and self-worth was just beginning, and this time, I would be the one holding the pen. After Julia's icy reply, the walls around me closed tighter. Marcus stopped returning my texts altogether, and Elena's once warm smiles turned into carefully measured nods I barely recognized. Invitations that once came my way for family dinners or casual get-togethers vanished like mist. I found myself erased from the very moments I had fought to create. The annual family outings became a showcase of exclusion. Photos posted online with me cropped out or blurred, plans made without a word, and hushed conversations that stopped when I entered the room. The sting of isolation was sharp, a gnawing ache beneath my ribs that no amount of forced smiles could mask. Carlos was my anchor, but even his patience waned under the relentless tide of family discord. He tried to shield me from the cutting remarks and sideways glances, but the exhaustion was contagious. I sensed his frustration when I'd pour out the latest slight, Julia's latest snide comment or Marcus's dismissive attitude, and he'd sigh, rubbing his temple as if carrying my burden was wearing him down too. I hated feeling like a problem, a source of constant tension. Was I really the one causing all this? The question haunted me during sleepless nights, twisting my thoughts into knots of self-doubt. I replayed conversations, wondering if my tone had been too sharp, my expectations too high. Financially, the weight remained solely on my shoulders. The bills piled up, the credit card statements showed the same draining patterns. Airline tickets, hotel reservations, emergency medical costs, utility arrears, all quietly paid by me. No, thank you. No acknowledgement beyond Julia's bitter remarks about my supposed tight grip on the purse strings. Vulnerability became my curse. Every plea for fairness met with suspicion or contempt. I could almost hear Julia's smirk behind her words, as if my kindness was a weapon aimed only at inviting control, not compassion. The family became a fortress with walls built from my sacrifices, yet I was left standing outside, shivering in the cold. The most painful part was the silence. Not just the absence of words, but the way the air shifted in rooms when I entered. A collective holding of breath, a subtle turning away. Elena, once my little sister in spirit if not blood, now mirrored Julia's coldness. It was as if she'd swallowed the script Julia wrote for her, a narrative where I was the villain, the interloper who dared to challenge the delicate balance. The kitchen, the living room, even the backyard where so many memories were made. These spaces became battlegrounds where my presence was a provocation. I retreated more and more, wrapping myself in a shell of quiet endurance, trying not to fracture under the weight of invisibility. That year's holiday season was the coldest I'd ever known. Julia's smile was sharp and false, her compliments laced with condescension. Marcus barely glanced my way, and Elena's eyes darted anxiously when our paths crossed. Carlos held my hand tightly as we left a family dinner early, the tension suffocating. As I lay awake that night, the ledger of debts and sacrifices spread open before me. I felt the edges of my resolve fraying. I was utterly alone in a family that thrived on my giving yet recoiled from my presence. The ache was physical, a hollow in my chest that no amount of explanation or apology could fill. I wondered if this was the price of love. Invisibility disguised as sacrifice. The breaking point came unexpectedly during the annual family vacation, an event I had funded almost entirely again. Nearly $7,000 from my savings squeezed to the last cent. I had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that this time the warmth would return. But Julia was waiting, a storm dressed in silk. At dinner on the third night, in front of guests and relatives, she launched into a tirade about my budgeting, her voice cutting through the laughter like a blade. Skylar's so tight and controlling, always counting every penny as if money grows on trees, she sneered. eyes glinting with cruel satisfaction. The room went silent, all eyes flickering toward me, the target of her venom. I felt the heat rise to my cheeks, burning with humiliation. I opened my mouth, desperate to explain, but Julia didn't give me the chance. Her words were sharp and final, designed to shut me down. And then came the worst. A forged signature on a family account statement, supposedly mine, showing unauthorized charges. Julia presented it as proof, her tone dripping with accusation. "How do you explain this, Skylar? Theft? Fraud?" The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I shook my head in disbelief, my voice trembling as I denied everything. The room split into factions, but most sided with Julia, swept up in her narrative of betrayal. Carlos's hand gripped mine under the table, a lifeline amid the storm. But even he looked weary. I caught Elena's eyes, wide, confused, uncertain, and Marcus's smirk edged with triumph. The family I had tried so desperately to protect was weaponizing lies to destroy me. Grandpa Thomas's death and the sealed envelope he'd left felt like distant echoes now, a reminder of truths buried beneath layers of deceit. It was in that moment, watching the people I loved turn their backs, that something inside me shattered, a brittle shell finally cracking to reveal cold, clear clarity. I was no longer a victim to be crushed. I was the storm gathering strength before the reckoning. In the quiet aftermath, I retreated into myself, nursing wounds that no balm could soothe. I went over every memory, every sacrifice, every moment of silence and pain. The ledger and journals, once a symbol of quiet endurance, now burned in my hands like kindling. Years of giving, of being unseen and unheard, crystallized into a sharp, burning truth. I had been exploited, marginalized, silenced, deliberately. The patterns weren't accidents but calculated moves in a game I hadn't realized I was playing. For the first time, I allowed the anger to rise unchecked, a fierce, justified fury born from betrayal and love twisted into weaponry. I remembered the nights I stayed up, comforting Elena through tears, juggling bills to keep Marcus afloat, sacrificing my dreams without complaint. And now, those memories fueled a fire I could no longer contain. "Never again," I whispered to the empty room, voice steady despite the tears. I was done being invisible, done being the family's scapegoat and ATM. The pain that had once crushed me now forged a resolve as sharp as steel. This awakening was more than anger. It was a reclaiming of self, a refusal to be erased. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't known in a long time: power. Late one night, I found myself sitting across from Carlos, the soft glow of the lamp casting shadows on our faces. The house was silent except for the ticking clock and our steady breaths. I told him everything: the humiliation, the isolation, the forged signature, the way Julia had weaponized lies. His eyes were steady, filled with unwavering support. "You can't let this go on," he said quietly, voice firm. We talked through the tangled mess of emotions and facts, and slowly a plan began to take shape. It wasn't about revenge or destruction. It was about truth, about justice, about reclaiming what was rightfully mine. Together, we mapped out the next steps: a thorough financial audit focusing on documented proof, receipts, bank statements, the ledger I'd kept hidden all these years. Carlos emphasized the importance of proportionality and legality, grounding my rising fury with calm pragmatism. I felt a surge of empowerment as I realized my secret weapon, the meticulous records of my sacrifices, could finally be wielded. No longer silent, no longer invisible, I was ready to expose the truth. The mood shifted between us from despair to quiet determination, a new chapter unfolding in the stillness of that night. The fight for my dignity was no longer a whispered hope. It was a calculated campaign just beginning to take form. I spread the mountain of paperwork across the dining table: bank statements, credit card bills, receipts, and those endless spreadsheets I'd kept tucked away for years. The smell of ink on paper mixed with the faint scent of stale coffee, evidence of many late nights spent tracking every cent. As I sifted through the data, the patterns leapt out at me like glaring neon signs. Julia's extravagant shopping sprees, from designer bags to expensive dinners at places none of us could ever afford, were being quietly covered by loans I'd extended without complaint. The credit card bills showed it all: my name, my accounts, my credit stretched thin to fund her indulgences. Marcus's business was no better off. At first, I'd thought he managed on his own, but every month my bank statements revealed bailouts disguised as emergency loans or business investments. What felt like generosity was, in reality, a lifeline for his complacency, a safety net propping up his entitled lifestyle. Then there was Elena. Her designer clothes, private school tuition, and lavish birthday parties were all paid by me, silently and without thanks. Every sacrifice I'd made, every penny I'd spent, was a chain binding them to me, and yet, paradoxically, tightening the noose around my own freedom. I even consulted a forensic accountant, someone completely neutral, to help me analyze the mountain of data. The results were staggering: gaps in Julia's claimed income, expenses that didn't add up, and financial maneuvers that seemed designed to hide debts and inflate appearances. Julia had been weaving a financial web that depended wholly on me, her puppet master in the shadows, unknowingly pulling the strings beneath my feet. The realization struck me like a thunderclap. I held the power, hidden in plain sight, and for the first time, I saw it not as a burden, but as leverage. The weight of this discovery settled over me, a cold clarity sharpening my thoughts. I was no longer just the family's invisible ATM. I was the linchpin, the one whose withdrawal could unravel the entire charade. Julia's control wasn't absolute. It was precariously balanced on my continued sacrifice. And Marcus, the brother who once scorned me, was just as reliant. Elena's comfortable life, the very image Julia projected of a perfect family, was built on my silent suffering. The vulnerability was real, and I mapped it with precision. I felt the first flicker of something I hadn't dared to believe before. I could fight back. Yet, even with the power mapped out before me, I knew I had to tread carefully. This wasn't just about money. It was about years of emotional manipulation, of roles carefully assigned and painfully lived. I had to prepare, without revealing my hand, to build a fortress of evidence while maintaining the calm appearance the family expected. A storm was coming, but for now, the surface remained still. I folded the papers slowly, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and fierce hope. The game was no longer theirs to play alone. I had the map, the proof, and the resolve. The fight for my dignity was no longer a whisper, it was becoming a roar. For days after, I moved like a ghost through the house, my face calm, my words measured, while inside, a tempest brewed. Every document was photocopied, scanned, and backed up on encrypted drives hidden among my personal files. Passwords on all joint accounts were changed discreetly, nothing too obvious to raise suspicion, but enough to lock down control. I reached out to a trusted family lawyer under the guise of seeking advice about estate planning, careful not to reveal more than necessary. Meanwhile, I saved emails and text messages where Julia's manipulations lurked, her attempts at gaslighting carefully archived for the moment they would matter most. Family gatherings went on as usual: birthday dinners, casual Sunday lunches, even the annual picnic where Julia played the perfect hostess. I smiled and nodded, pouring the usual cups of coffee, laughing at jokes that stung just beneath the surface. Carlos watched me with quiet pride, his steady presence a balm amid the tension. To everyone else, I was still the dutiful daughter, the steady rock who kept the family afloat. But beneath my composed exterior, I was setting the stage for something far bigger. Every interaction, every smile, was a thread in the trap I was weaving, a delicate balance of illusion and intent. Behind closed doors, I made lists, mapped timelines, and rehearsed conversations. I reminded myself to breathe, to stay patient, to hold on to the calm that would disarm suspicion. The hardest part was the silence, the need to hide my growing fire from those who'd use it against me. Julia's shadow still loomed, her calculated cruelty a constant threat. But I was no longer the scared girl who swallowed insults and swallowed her voice. I was preparing to speak, to expose, and to reclaim what had been stolen. The quiet before the storm was deafening within me, but I welcomed it. I had to be ready. The family dinners, the seemingly benign moments, were all battlegrounds where my true fight would begin. Then, unexpectedly, Marcus approached me one chilly evening, his face a mixture of hesitation and something I hadn't seen in years, regret. We met at a quiet cafe, away from prying eyes and family ears. His voice was low, barely above a whisper, as he confessed the truth that shattered everything I thought I knew. While going through the late grandfather's estate documents, Marcus had uncovered evidence of Julia's financial deceit, funds diverted from their father's medical bills, hidden transfers, and falsified statements. He slid a folder across the table, thick with bank statements and internal emails that painted Julia in a damning light. The betrayal was raw in his tone, a stark contrast to the blind loyalty he'd shown before. I stared at the papers, disbelief and a surge of vindication crashing through me. Marcus's alliance was a game-changer, a crack in the family's armor that I hadn't dared hope for. The brother who had once dismissed me was now an unexpected ally, his voice joining mine in exposing Julia's lies. The weight of years spent feeling isolated lifted slightly, replaced by a new, fragile hope. The dynamic that had kept me silenced was fracturing, and with Marcus's evidence in hand, the urgency to act grew. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the truth that could no longer be hidden. Together, we held the power to dismantle the toxic web Julia had spun. That night, I lay awake with the folder beside me, the damning papers illuminated by the soft glow of the bedside lamp. I felt the shifting tides beneath my feet, the family's foundation trembling. The stakes had never been higher, and the path forward was fraught with risk. But with Marcus's support, I was no longer alone in this fight. The delicate balance of power was tilting, and I could almost taste the possibility of justice. The family's secrets, long buried in silence and sacrifice, were ready to surface. I steeled myself for the battle ahead, knowing the first moves would change everything. With the evidence Marcus provided, I wasted no time initiating the first phase of my plan. I contacted the family's lawyers, sharing the documents and laying out the irregularities with precise detail. Banks were notified of suspicious activity, and I took steps to freeze joint accounts, cutting off the financial lifelines that Julia had depended on. The decision to stop payments on Julia's car and house expenses felt like a hammer striking the glass ceiling that had long confined me. Julia noticed the sudden financial cutoffs immediately, her shock evident in the sharpness of her questions, but she couldn't trace the source. The web of control I'd maintained was beginning to unravel, and she was caught off guard. Simultaneously, I sent formal letters requesting reimbursement for the funds I had fronted over the years, accompanied by the meticulously gathered documentation. The tone was firm, yet measured, leaving no room for denial or evasion. I watched from the sidelines as murmurs began to ripple through the family, creditors questioning Julia, relatives leaning in with curious eyes, and Julia's carefully constructed image starting to crack. The first cracks of rebellion in the fortress she'd built were visible, though she remained unaware of the architect behind them. The family dinners grew tense. Julia's smile faltered under the weight of unspoken accusations. Despite the upheaval, the family had yet to connect the dots. Julia's confusion was palpable, and Marcus's newfound silence spoke volumes. Elena seemed caught in a whirlwind of uncertainty, her once naive demeanor shadowed by doubt. I remained outwardly calm, playing my part with practiced grace while the consequences of my actions rippled quietly beneath the surface. The storm had begun, subtle but unstoppable, and though the family didn't yet see me as the force behind it, I felt the power coursing through every move. The long years of silence and sacrifice were breaking free, and for the first time, I was in control. The memorial for Grandpa Thomas was meant to be a somber gathering, a time for quiet reflection and respect. Instead, it became the stage for the reckoning I'd long rehearsed in my mind. The room was heavy with muted grief, the air thick with the scent of lilies and old wood, the soft murmur of relatives exchanging condolences. Julia was there, radiant as ever, playing the perfect grieving widow, her hand nestled possessively in Marcus's. Elena hovered close, eyes wide and trusting, unaware of the storm I carried in my clutch. I felt the weight of the envelope Grandpa had left me in my bag, a silent reminder of the truth waiting to break free. Taking a deep breath, I stood, smoothing the front of my dress with trembling hands. The room's soft chatter fell into an expectant hush as all eyes turned toward me. My voice was calm, steady, but beneath that surface, my heart hammered like a drum signaling battle. I pulled out the ledger, the detailed account of every single dollar I'd poured into this family's life, the silent sacrifices no one ever acknowledged. I laid it on the polished mahogany table, flipping it open to reveal columns of receipts, bank statements, and notes that traced the $150,000 I'd quietly bled. Faces shifted, eyes flickering from paper to me, disbelief threading through the room like a current. Julia's face paled, the vibrant colors draining like paint left out in the rain. I watched her lips press thin as I continued, voice rising just enough to carry the weight of years spent invisible. I revealed the stark contrast, my financial contributions against Julia's minimal input, the truth of her lavish spending funded by my credit and quiet endurance. Then, like a final blow, I laid down Marcus's folder, the damning evidence of her deceit, hidden transfers, forged documents, and manipulation laid bare. The room buzzed with whispered shock, a tapestry of gasps and murmurs weaving through our relatives. Julia's empire, so carefully constructed, was crumbling before their eyes. I met Julia's gaze, unflinching and clear. "This ends now," I declared, voice firm, unwavering. "I am no longer your scapegoat, your ATM, your invisible sacrifice. The truth is here for all to see." The silence that followed was electric, a charged pause where the family's unspoken tensions broke free. Supportive glances flickered my way, relatives who had always seen the cracks but never dared speak. For the first time, I felt their unspoken solidarity. This was my champagne moment, that intoxicating instant when power shifted like tectonic plates beneath familiar ground. The invisible daughter had made herself visible, and no one could look away. Julia's hands curled into fists, knuckles whitening, but she said nothing, her silence louder than any protest. Marcus swallowed hard, eyes darting between us, no longer able to pretend ignorance. Elena's gaze dropped, confusion and hurt mingling as the facade shattered around her. I stood tall, letting the weight of truth do its work, feeling the cold clarity of justice settling in my bones. This confrontation was not just a statement, it was a declaration of self-worth, a reclaiming of the dignity I'd long been denied. The room was no longer a place of mourning. It was the battleground where my voice finally rang loud, clear, and undeniable. In the days that followed, Julia's carefully constructed world began to unravel with alarming speed. The relatives who had once averted their eyes now approached me, their questions pointed, their doubts clear. Estranged family members reached out with tentative apologies and requests for clarity, finally willing to hear what had been silenced for so long. Julia's phone buzzed incessantly, calls from creditors, friends, and family, each demanding answers she struggled to provide. Her calm veneer cracked under the weight of mounting pressure, her usual control slipping like sand through trembling fingers. I watched as Marcus and Elena, once her staunch defenders, wavered, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. Julia's desperate calls to them were met with polite distances and firm refusals. The love bombing, the guilt trips, the manipulative pleas, they all collided with the fortress of boundaries I had erected. My responses were measured and resolute, a stark contrast to the frantic energy Julia exuded. Where she sought to draw me back into dependency, I stood firm, my voice steady, my resolve unbroken. Her isolation grew visibly, the alliances she had taken for granted dissolving as the truth settled in. Financial audits and inquiries from institutions she once controlled now exposed the depths of her deceit. Julia's reputation, once a golden shield, crumbled along with her illusions of power. The family dinners became strained, the air thick with tension and unspoken accusations. I, however, moved through the turmoil with a quiet dignity, no longer the victim, but the architect of change. The cascading consequences of that one revelation rippled outward, shaking loose years of lies and silence. Julia's kingdom was no longer secure, and the ground beneath her feet was shifting fast, too fast for her to control. In a final, desperate bid to regain control, Julia unleashed a flurry of manipulation tactics that only highlighted her growing desperation. She recruited extended family and mutual friends, spinning webs of rumors accusing me of betrayal and greed. Whisper campaigns took shape, designed to isolate me further, to paint me as the villain in a story I hadn't written. Legal threats surfaced, letters filled with empty promises of lawsuits and defamation, attempts to scare me back into silence. She pressed Marcus relentlessly, trying to pull him back into her orbit, dangling loyalty and guilt like poisoned gifts, but I was prepared. The legal counsel I had engaged stood firmly by me, turning away every baseless threat with calm efficiency. Marcus, having seen the truth, refused to be swayed again. The flying monkeys, those who carried Julia's lies, found no purchase in my steadfast composure or the mountain of evidence I held. Every attempt to tarnish my reputation bounced off a shield forged from years of pain and quiet strength. I answered with truth and grace, refusing to descend into the chaos Julia invited. Her final cards, played with trembling hands, failed spectacularly, leaving her more isolated and powerless than ever before. Her world shrank visibly with each failed ploy, the isolation deepening into something cold and undeniable. Julia, once the puppet master, now found herself alone on a shrinking stage, her influence fading like a shadow at dusk. I felt the tides of power shift irrevocably, the air clearing around me as the toxic fog lifted. The family, once divided by manipulation and fear, began to glimpse a different reality, one where truth and integrity could exist. I did not gloat. Instead, I held my ground with quiet dignity, knowing that victory was not just in exposing lies, but in reclaiming my life and peace. Now free from the chains of financial exploitation and emotional manipulation, I found myself standing on the threshold of a new life. The weight that had pressed on my shoulders for so long lifted, replaced by a calm strength that felt like sunlight after a storm. My relationship with Carlos deepened, grounded in honesty and mutual respect. And even Marcus, once distant, grew closer through the shared path of truth. I set firm boundaries, no longer the sole financier of family vacations or emergencies, no longer the invisible backbone. I was reclaiming my space, my worth, my voice. Julia faded into the background, estranged from the family she once controlled, left to face the consequences of her actions alone. The toxic patterns that had ruled for years began to dissolve, replaced by a fragile but growing hope. I looked back on the journey, from the invisible scapegoat silenced by sacrifice to the empowered woman who dared to speak her truth with a quiet pride. The scars remained, but they were no longer chains. They were reminders of strength forged in fire. In this new chapter, I was not defined by what I had endured but by who I had become. With resolve born from pain and healing, I opened a counseling center dedicated to women recovering from toxic family dynamics. It was a testament to the resilience that had carried me through, a beacon of hope for those still caught in silence. Every day, I welcomed women whose stories mirrored mine, whose voices had been stifled and whose worth had been questioned. Together, we built a space of healing and empowerment, a refuge where strength reclaimed its place. As I watched that community grow, I felt the full circle of my journey settle into peace. The past was not forgotten, but it no longer held power over me. I was free, and with freedom came the promise of a future defined by hope, not sacrifice.